Welcome to Tell, a podcast about Copenhagen and Denmark's history. Written and produced by Danish historian and tour guide Rune Edberg. This podcast features excerpts from Rune Edberg's book Know Your Dane: Unlocking the Secrets to the Danish Mentality, as well as stories from his 2 walking tours, World War II and Copenhagen, and Copenhagen's Dark History Walk. It is possible to book a spot on these tours on the website copentell.com. On this episode,
Opposites react, Danish-Swedish relations. As mentioned in the previous sections, the Danish-Swedish relationship is one of the most complicated and dramatic in history. War, competition, and disputes between the 2 countries have characterized their history for hundreds of years. Although there is greater understanding and cooperation today, their relationship remains problematic. The long history of the 2 countries has seen both transform. From medium-sized European powers to small states with an international comeback, like modern welfare states. When it comes to war, Denmark and Sweden have been in more armed conflict with each other than most countries in the world. From the 1600s to 1800s, the 2 countries were at war with each other a total of 8 times. This was a powerful contributing factor to Denmark's fall from the peak of Northern European power, but it also contributed to reforming Danish society, while Sweden later also lost its role as the dominant power in the Baltic region to Denmark's ally Russia. After losing Norway in 1814, Denmark sought to normalize relations with Sweden, believing that their common cultural values and norms would pave the way for peace between the 2 countries. However, there has always been a focus on the small differences that exist between the countries. Both were neutral in the First World War, but in the Second World War, Denmark and Norway were occupied by Nazi Germany. Sweden maintained its neutrality throughout the war by cooperating with Nazi Germany. Sweden rescued the Danish Jews, but also supplied iron ore to the Germans, while letting them pass through Sweden to take and occupy Norway. After the war, Sweden continued its neutrality, and Denmark and Norway joined the United States in NATO. However, the Nordic countries tried to create a common political agenda by establishing the Nordic Council in 1952. Impact on the Danish mentality. One of the keys to the Danish mentality, including the Danes' sense of national identity and self-perception, is its direct opposition to the Swedes. The Danes really like to reflect on their relationship with the Swedes, and the key features that they consider define them as Danish are their differences from the Swedes. The historical conflicts between the 2 countries, and their different sizes geographically, cause the Danes to see themselves as the naughty little brother, who isn't afraid to offend the bigger and more politically correct sister, Sweden. For example, there's a different take on globalization and immigration in Denmark and Sweden. The Danes often see it as a threat to a small nation with an overall homogeneous population, and it is considered important to talk about the underlying fears behind immigration in the open. In Sweden, the official connotation is that immigration can give Sweden a head start in the global competition by attracting a lot of people to the Swedish workforce, and that the focus shouldn't be on a person's background and culture for the person to feel welcome in the country. A different component is that the Swedes defined their citizenship in the way of the old French Republic, with universal democratic values. If you have a Swedish passport and you feel like a citizen of Sweden, then no matter what your background is, you're considered Swedish. In Denmark, the idea of citizenship is considered to be connected to the Danish national state, as well as the Danish language, culture, and norms, and all those elements are expected to be assimilated to when a person receives Danish citizenship. Another big difference is that the Danes want the right to talk about every subject imaginable in the public debate on immigration, regardless of whether it offends different ethnic minorities. For instance, crime committed by a certain group. In Sweden, it is the overall sense that you shouldn't focus on a certain group, but instead speak in more general terms. Therefore, in Denmark, the sense is that the Swedes are politically correct and afraid of speaking about unpleasant subjects. In return, Sweden sees Denmark as a country that isn't afraid to vocalize its opinions, but at the same time, could hurt certain groups with their demand for freedom of speech.
The gates to the dark history of Copenhagen are open once again. On this walking tour, we will take a journey back in time to some of the most dramatic, tragic, and dark events in the Danish capital's history. In the company of our historian Rune Edberg, we will visit the central locations in the old medieval part of the city centre. From Swedish besieges and British bombardments, to witch burnings and executions, Copenhagen was a much smaller city than today, enclosed and claustrophobic behind high city walls, and with sparse and primitive sanitary conditions, which became a threat to its inhabitants when the plague epidemic hit in 1711, killing 1/3 of Copenhagen's inhabitants. The dark part of Copenhagen's history includes poverty and poor housing, which played its part in the bad living conditions of the majority of the population. Other dramatic stories and events told on this tour include the cholera epidemic of 1853 and the city fires of 1728 and 1795, which have played a central part in shaping the current look and architecture of Copenhagen's city centre. We will also pass some of the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard's old addresses, and the place where the world-famous Danish brewery, Carlsberg, was founded. So, book your spot on the tour now on copentel.com.
Nurseries and kindergarten. After childbirth, visits from the home healthcare provider, and daycare services, the child's next step in the Danish Welfare Society is the nursery school, Vuggestuen. Nurseries provide overall care for children aged 0 to 3 years. It can be either a privately owned or municipally owned institution. The nursery offers childcare, educational activities, and physical and mental stimulation from a developmental perspective for each individual child. Payment may vary from municipality to municipality, depending on the parent's income. With a low income, it is possible for one's children to attend nursery for free. When the child has become too old to go to the nursery school, the next step is the transition to kindergarten, an educational institution targeted at 2 to 7-year-olds. It should be added that some creches and kindergartens are integrated institutions, which means the child will attend nursery and kindergarten in the same building. There are several types of kindergartens in Denmark. For example, some focus on the outdoors and are called forest kindergartens. Here, the children are often outside for most of the day. Other institutions focus on sports or culture, and private institutions can have a pedagogical outlook. Book a spot on Copentel's World War II walking tour in Copenhagen. Take a journey back to the 1940s, when the Nazi German forces had occupied the Danish capital. On this guided walking tour we will visit the city district of Vesterbro and the city center of Copenhagen. In the company of our historian Rune Edberg, who is specialized in the Second World War and the German occupation of Denmark 1940 to 1945, you will have the unique opportunity to visit some of the central places of the Danish freedom struggle during the Second World War. You'll become acquainted with the central themes and paradoxes of the period. Danes in the resistance movement and Danes in German service, which came to violent expression through assassinations and bomb attacks that divided the Danish population during the 5 long years from 1940 to 1945. We will stop outside at some of Copenhagen's most central locations and sites from the Second World War. This includes the former Gestapo headquarters at Shellhuset, where we will hear the story of the British bombing of the building on the 21st of March 1945 and its consequences. We will also visit the place where the resistance group Holger Dansk was founded and come past the dreaded addresses from which Hitler's henchmen ruled Denmark with an iron hand. You can book your spot on copentel.com.
You have been listening to Copentel, a podcast about Copenhagen and Denmark's history. Written and produced by Danish historian and tour guide Rune Edberg. This podcast features excerpts from Rune Edberg's book Know Your Dane, Unlocking the Secrets to the Danish Mentality, as well as stories from his 2 walking tours, World War II and Copenhagen, and Copenhagen's Dark History Walk. It is possible to book a spot on these tours on the website copentel.com.